Welcome back to the Gritty Men Podcast. I'm John Riggs, your host, and as always, we're here to equip, encourage, and inspire God's men to live God's way for God's glory in these incredible days. Hey, a big shout out to all of you fathers out there. I guess you could say that this is the Father's Day edition of the Gritty Men Podcast. So, hey, happy Father's Day to each and every one of you out there. We're going to talk on the topic that really is very important to us as fathers. If you're listening to this podcast, you may have had a good example of this in your life by your father, or you could have had no example or even a very poor example of the topic of discussion today, and that is the topic of leadership. Some of you listening to this podcast could say, yeah, my dad was a great leader. Some of you also might say, well, my dad was a very poor example of what leadership looks like. And others of you would say, well, I didn't have a father in my life, so I can't tell you what a good leader looks like in relation to what it means to be a father or a husband. And so I know we have quite a variation in the lives of men who watch this podcast. So, guys, I do want to share with you, though, what the Scriptures teach us about leadership. And I think it's important for us because we all are called by God and we're all accountable to God for our leadership. And that is the stewardship that we have before God as we lead our wives and our children. And so I want to begin, though, this podcast with asking a simple question: what is leadership? And obviously there's a lot of definitions out there. If you do a quick Google search of the definition of leadership, you're going to get hundreds of different definitions of what leadership is. There is a commonality to some of these, and here's one of the definitions you'll see over and over again, and that is leadership is the ability to influence and guide others toward a common goal or purpose. The reality is, guys, if you try to look at the world, you're going to see some good examples of leadership, because not all worldly leaders are poor examples of leadership. But if you want to have a true standard of biblical leadership, you're going to have to go to the Word of God to find what that looks like. And of course, the greatest example of perfect leadership in Scripture would be Christ. He is the standard by which we live our lives. He is the Word, He is truth, He is God incarnate, and He is the one in whom we will give an account to in regards to the way in which we stewarded our wives, children, resources, gifts, talents, time. We'll give an account for that. So we want to go to Christ and learn from Him about what true leadership looks like. There's some great leaders that we can find in Scripture, and then there's also some examples of some poor leaders in Scripture. But nonetheless, leadership as we know it, it does require leading. That's the part of leadership that's important, is it requires someone to take the lead. Now, I realize that not everybody has seen a good example of this in relation to their home. Growing up in a home, maybe an absentee father, he wasn't there. He was not there to demonstrate true leadership to you. So your mom, maybe she had to step up and she had to do some things that would have been very difficult for her, but she did. So thank God for you that had moms out there that stood in the gap in certain areas of your life. Maybe you grew up with a father in the home, but he was there, but he was absent. In other words, he was very committed to other things. He was busy working. He was busy with playing. He was busy doing everything else but being present at home. And sometimes we find that to be a reality in the lives of some men. Or possibly, as I mentioned earlier, you didn't have an example of that. So nonetheless, leadership requires that someone take the lead. And here's something we really need to think about and focus on. We're going to learn about what leadership is, but leadership ultimately requires someone leading. Leadership also, as we know it, it is influence. In other words, leaders have influence over others. So it's important to understand that leadership is influence. Leadership also provides vision and common goal, a common goal. In other words, leadership is going to set some direction. So in the home, we understand that we are required as men to be leaders over our home, over our marriages. I hate to use the word over because sometimes guys take that the wrong way. Leadership just means that we're accountable to God for the way in which we lead our wives and the way that we lead our children. And you need to really examine how you're leading, because you are accountable for that, because that's your place, that's your role, and that's what you are going to be accountable to God for. One of the things is how you led in the area of your marriage, your wife, and your children that God has provided and given to you. So leadership leads. Leadership has influence over others. Leadership sets direction. That's why in the home, it's important for the husband and wife to come together and to determine some goals that they would like to have for their family. And so that's one of the great things you can do as a new family, as a husband and wife. My wife and I, when we first began to date and get serious about marriage, we even established some certain goals that we wanted to have for us that we would attempt to meet, whether it be something fairly short term, something maybe a year, 3-year or 5-year goals. And then we have those in front of us, and now we can begin to work the steps. So part of leadership is setting vision or a common goal and direction. And we want to do that as men. So we know this, that if you don't have any direction, then you're not going to get anywhere specific in life. So if you just took off and started driving with no idea where you're going or no rhyme or reason to the direction you would go, you're never going to arrive at a very specific destination. So you never get somewhere by chance if it was a specific location you were headed to, okay? Unless that location was nowhere or lost or whatever. So we need to set, guys, some direction, give vision, and have goals that we can work toward as a family, as a husband and wife, as a family to attain. Maybe there's certain things that you desire for your kids, whether that be your wife would stay at home and she would fulfill her role before God and her desire to raise the children, and she would like to do that. And so if that's a goal that the two of you establish early on in your relationship as far as your dating goes, then by all means, you're not going to go out and get into a tremendous amount of debt, because that would what? That would hinder you from being able to what? Successfully attain that goal. And so poor leadership would mean, hey, my wife wants to stay home with the kids, so let's go ahead and go get 2 big vehicle payments. Let's go ahead and get a new house and have multiple payments that we are just strapped financially. With both of us working, we can barely make ends meet. Well, you wouldn't be leading very well if your goal was for your wife to stay home and be able to take care of those precious children that God has given you to steward. They are a gift from the Lord. And so that would be an example of poor leadership. Good leadership would say, okay, sweetheart, this is what we've decided together as a husband and wife that we would like to achieve. And so here's a 1, 3, 5-year plan, whatever it is. So when you graduate college and you both get your first job, then what you're not going to do is you're not going to just go bonkers and start spending all kinds of money and getting in debt, because you will not achieve those goals. And so leadership is going to set direction. It's going to work the steps to achieve the goal, and you're going to lead by example. That's what you're going to do in that regard. So leadership requires stability, and not only stability, but common sense. Okay, there needs to be some common sense within leadership as well. But a leader needs to be a stable individual. In other words, we can't be someone who's going to lead our family well and our wife well if we're constantly vacillating back and forth on different things. We need to be stalwart, if you will, steadfast. We need to be someone that is stable and able to maintain and continue in the direction that we have set ourselves to go. So great leaders are stable. Great leaders lead. Great leaders understand the power of their influence. Great leaders set direction and vision. And great leaders, they are stable individuals. They're not going to be upsetting the apple cart constantly when difficulty comes or trials or tests. They're not run by their emotions. They're able to lead and not go completely cattywampus over everything. So another aspect of great leadership is just stability, okay? Just be Just be a steadfast individual and using common sense, which it seems to be something that is harder and harder to find, but I would rather have someone with common sense than I would a whole lot of book learning and degrees. Now, it's great if you have both because, man, that's a powerful combination if you have knowledge and common sense. But if you give me the option to choose two people, someone with a whole lot of knowledge and no common sense, or someone without a whole lot of learning and expertise but has a tremendous amount of common sense, I'm going to choose the guy with common sense every single time. Because common sense is basically that. It is sensible decision making that works, okay? It's sensible. So that's another important aspect of leadership. Here's another one. Problem solving. That's something else we do in leadership. As husbands, we oftentimes have to take the role of solving problems. That's what we do. I'm thankful that I have a great wife that we can work together to resolve problems or issues, but there's some things that need to be resolved that I need to just take the bull by the horns and deal with it and solve it and resolve it. So I need to be able to have the ability in a stable, common sense kind of way of solving problems. I need to be a problem solver. In fact, many of you men, that is just who you are in your very nature. We are problem solvers. You know, sometimes your wife will come to you and she just wants to talk about something. And my wife even will say this, I want to talk to you about this, but I don't want you to solve it. Okay? She'll even put that out there because that's naturally what I'm going to do. I'm naturally going to say, okay, here's the problem. Let's figure out how we solve this problem. I mean, that's right where my mind goes. Let's just fix it. Let's solve it. Let's get it done. Here's the steps. Here's the problem. What do we need to remove? What do we need to resolve? That's kind of how our minds work. That's a good thing because we need to be able to problem solve. Here's something else that I've learned, just a little nugget of information for you guys. I've learned some of these things, and this is something new that I've learned. Now, after having been married 30 years, actually 31 this year, coming up here shortly, and raising 3 kids, which my youngest one is a senior at in university right now, be graduating next May, and so I have 3 adult children, and I've learned something. When they were younger, I was always solving problems, or they would come to me, we'd figure out how we could solve this problem. But what I've learned as they've gotten older, I still have that tendency because that's who I am and that's what I've done for 20-some years of their life, that now changes. And so now my opinion or the resolution to a problem they may have, sometimes I would give that information out without really being asked for that information. So I've had to learn about fatherhood in a new way because, see, you're never done being a father. So I know that some of you have had fathers that they've checked out, man. It's like you turned 17 and they were done, gone, never fought. No, but here's the thing. Fatherhood is a lifetime responsibility. It just changes through different seasons. But you're still needed, you're very important, and that will never come to an end. Because you still have influence, you still have all of these incredible things that you have to offer. You're just going to need to realize that seasons are different, and the way in which you interact with your kids in different seasons of their life is important, and it takes some learning to figure it out. So if you're new in this area like I am, you've got kind of the empty nest, absolutely, can I say awesome? It's an incredible season, man. I tell you what, I hear guys and women all the time, they're all worried about the empty nest. What are we going to do? What's life going to be like? Are you kidding me? It's like my second college experience. I mean, except now you have wisdom. You have lots of years of experience. You have a lot of things you didn't have then. And so it's even better than the old college days. It's even better than that. It's like the most incredible season of my entire life. It is absolutely awesome, and that's an understatement, okay? It's just amazing. So, hey, if you guys are in the throes of raising children, enjoy that season because it's an incredible season, wonderful season, awesome season of your life. But hang on, because there's good seasons coming, okay? Just want to encourage you in that today. So leadership also requires the ability to problem solve or to help other people solve the problem by asking them when they bring you a problem, well, here's the deal. Since you brought me the problem, I want to give you a little bit of time to bring me 3 solutions that you know of that bring a resolution to the problem that you brought me. So bring me back 3, and then we'll pick from one of those on how we solve the problem. And so sometimes leading is helping others learn how to resolve the problems as well. And that's part of what we do in leadership. Here's another one. Leadership is motivating others. In other words, there's an element of motivation and inspiration that comes along with leadership, and we want to motivate and inspire others. And so part of that is motivating. You know, with children, we have to motivate them as well at times in their life, right? We also have to discipline them. And sometimes discipline is motivation. Let's be honest, okay? So we have to motivate and to inspire, discipline, those things. Leadership is also accountability. It's another very important thing. It's also holding people accountable, but it's also being willing to be held accountable as a leader as well. And I think you need both. Leaders who are not willing to be held accountable are in a dangerous place. We all need to be held accountable. And so in our marriages, it's great. I hold my wife accountable. She holds me accountable. In raising kids, we hold our children accountable. And there's times that your children will even hold you accountable. Dad, you told me that today, Saturday, you set aside this time for you and I to go fishing. Or you set this time aside that you would teach me how to do this, or we're going to fix my truck, or we're going to, whatever it is. You know, they hold you accountable. And what do? You're absolutely right. You know what? I told you I was going to do that, so let's get that done. And that's part of accountability. Leadership is taking responsibility. It's taking responsibility. Because in the end, if you're a leader, whether it's in business or the home, you still have to take responsibility, okay? That's just the way that it is. And sometimes it's the result of taking responsibility when things don't go well, or when things go well, or someone does something, at the end of the day, still falls on you. You're the one that needs to be the one who owns it, takes responsibility for it. Now, I'm not saying I own or take responsibility for my child's disobedience, or the speeding ticket that they got, or something they did at school. No, they're going to be accountable for that, and they're going to have to take responsibility for that. But when it comes to the overarching direction of my home, the discipline of my kids, the way in which I lead and love my wife, the financial structure of our home, am I meeting the financial needs of my family? Am I a good steward of finances? Am I a good steward of my time? All of those things, they're part of what I am responsible for. And as leaders, we just own those things, and they're part of it. That's the way it goes. Leadership is bringing out the best in people, okay? In other words, it's seeing gifts, talents, and abilities in people and helping them use them to the best of their ability, or providing a means by which they can be all they can be, so to speak. And you'll do this whether it's in your corporate world, in leadership, or at your home. You want to lead your wife and love your wife in such a way, that she's like a fine wine. I mean, she just gets better with age. That's the way you want to love your wife. And there's really kind of a neat thing to watch over the years as you've loved your wife, you've been faithful to her, you've led her, all of these things. It's really fun to watch your wife, what I would just say, and this is kind of weird, but kind of bloom really, and just kind of just blossom and just grow and mature, and it's a pretty incredible thing to see. I'll say this, I think this is kind of cool too. In marriage, it's almost like there's kind of an evolution of you as an individual and of your spouse as an individual as you go through years of marriage. I heard it said one time that you get a new spouse every 7 years, okay? Now, not really, you don't get a new spouse, but what you do find is that your growth and maturity and the testing and the trials and the challenges and the victories and the growth and the learning, everything that happens in your life as you grow and mature and you get stretched, and all of these things you develop as a person. And so like my wife gets to watch me develop over time, and I get to watch her develop over time as well. And so like it is kind of neat, like watching her come to learn things that she didn't even necessarily know that she enjoyed doing, but now that she's done some of those things, she thoroughly loves those things, right? And she's seen the same thing in my life as well. So you get to kind of watch each other grow and develop through the seasons of marriage. And so my job and my responsibility is to, how can I do this for my wife? So early on in our marriage, my wife wanted to stay home with the kids, right? And so we said, okay, this is how this is going to go. I mean, my wife's a college educated, super smart, summa cum laude. She's just smart, okay? That's one of the things I love about her. It's attracted to her in many ways, but I always wanted to be married to a smart woman. Why? Because I like to have a great conversation with somebody we can talk about things, right? And so she's very intelligent, and the world was constantly saying, yeah, but you have all this to offer the world, which is the greatest lie of all. The greatest thing that my wife had to really offer, and any wife ever has to offer, or mother, has to ever offer, is what she gives to her kids and to her family, because no one else can do that. The world's not going to do that. The world can't offer what a mother can give to her kids. The world can't offer to her husband what a wife can give. The world can't offer to a home what a wife or mother brings to the home. It's impossible. I mean, the world can get another person to work X, Y, and Z job, but no one can replace her job in the home. No one can. And so society has completely lied to the men and women for generations now, and we took the moms and said that it was pretty much trivial to stay at home with your kids because you got so much more to bring and offer. Listen, there's no doubt that women are highly gifted, talented, smart individuals. Thank God for the intelligence, the giftedness, and all of the things that our wives are and have to offer. But thank God they offer those to our family. And so she wanted to stay home, right? That was kind of what we wanted. I didn't want her to be out there working when our kids were little. We don't want them going to a daycare or being raised by someone else. Every morning as I drive in and I go to a certain location that I go to, I have certain things that I do. I'm pretty habitual about how I do my life in certain areas. And I drive by this one place and I see all these young moms and dads early in the morning dropping off these tiny, tiny little kids. And I realize that many of them have to do that. And it's a heartbreak, right? And so my hat's off to those parents that are trying to make ends meet in this very difficult time of raising kids and financially. But if we've sacrificed family if we've sacrificed gold, silver, and precious stones and exchanged them for the trinkets of this world, which are wood, hay, and stubble, then that is absolute foolishness. And that is very poor leadership on the part of the man. If the man wants his wife to work solely so he can drive a new truck and could care less who invests in the lives of his kids, he's an absolute fool and a moron. He's worldly, and he is not representing what it means to be a godly leader, because he's trading the trinkets of the world for the treasures that God has given him. And so for those, though, that just simply want to drive that brand new Suburban, and so they're willing to have a $1,000 a month payment because it looks good to all the girls. You know, they all have blonde hair now. They all drive the Suburbs or the Rank Jeep, the new Jeep. They all have these great big gas hog vehicles, and they got 2 kids. And the reason they do that is because everybody does it, right? Then they got the new home, and then they got all these things. Listen, you can't have it all. Now, you think you can, but you can't, because if you're trading that trash for the treasure of your children, you are an absolute fool, and you've missed the greatest thing of all. And let me tell you something. You know how fast that season's going to go by? That fast. And here's the truth. You can always make money. Guys, money is easy to make. Money's not hard to make, okay? It's not. Now, your mindset on how you make money may be difficult to overcome, but making money is not the problem. You can't make time, and you'll never get it back. And that investment in the lives of those kids cannot ever be replaced. Can't be replaced. So I only bring that up as an example. So we made sacrifices early on in our married life through decisions we made about setting goals to achieve those goals and setting a direction for our family. Leadership meant that we had to do certain things. So as the leader, I did whatever I had to do over here to ensure that we could reach the goals and fulfill the direction that we wanted to take for our family. So whatever it meant on the provisionary side over here, that was my responsibility. Whatever it takes, whatever we got to do, and whatever that looks like. That's my job. That's my job, right? So my wife, though, in order for her to do that, she was willing to make whatever necessary sacrifices in order for that to happen. And she willingly did that. And I'm very grateful for my wife who invested those years in the lives of our children. So my wife is the type that she willingly sacrificed, not begrudgingly, but desirously, in order to provide the very best for our family and our kids. And as a husband, that's what my desire was too. Doesn't matter what all I got to do, what kind of work, how many jobs. Doesn't matter. We're going to do what it takes to make this happen. And so that's an example of how we apply leadership in those situations. And that's just one example. And I could share with you many of them throughout 30 plus years of marriage now. So leadership is a very, very, very crucial element. And fathers, let me tell you something. You are key, okay? You have been marginalized by our culture. Our society has marginalized you for about 50 years. The feminist movement has swept in here, and women power and all of that stuff. Listen, you can't be replaced. Cannot be replaced, man. No way, shape, form, or fashion can you be replaced. In fact, let me show you what has happened in our society according to stats that you can find. They're readily available. They're easy for you to locate on what happens when fathers are absent. You cannot, this stuff isn't made up. These are real numbers, okay? This is the way it is. Here we go. According to the data from 2022, there are approximately 18.3 million children across America who live without a father in the home, comprising of about 1 in 4 children. This is from the U.S. Census Bureau of 2022. The number is a major international outlier. We're speaking of the United States, you know, the country that says the American dream. Let me tell you, the American dream, although there's some great things about the prosperity that we've enjoyed, the freedoms we enjoyed, the American dream is a lie that says you can have all this, but that you've exchanged it for something. So you can't have something without letting go of something else. That's not how this deal works. That's not how Satan operates. Satan says, Jesus, you can have all the kingdoms of the world. They've been delivered to me. Thank you, Adam. They've been delivered to me, the title deed of the earth. I have the right to give them to whomever I choose. And what do we find? He says, you just simply what? Got to bow down and worship me. So there's always a catch with the enemy. Always is, always has been, always will be. So we know that the United States has the highest rate globally, guys, of children living in single-parent households, and over 80% of those are living without a father, okay? As of 2019, a staggering 23% of children live with one parent and no other adults, which was over 3 times the global average, which is 7%, right? And that's according to the Pew Research. We're not going to get into, here we go. In China and India, this number stands at only 3% and 4%. So we're at 23%, and China and India, they are at 3 and 4%. That comes from the Kramer study, 2021. The statistics are even more staggering for black children, with nearly 50% living with a single mother. Let that just settle in your mind for just a moment. That is tragic, and it's cultural, but it's tragic. So 50% of black children grow up in homes with a single mom. That's tragic, guys, and it has huge impacts. 23% of American children live in single-parent homes. Over 80% of those are mothers only. Overall, single mothers head up 80% of single-parent households. Sadly, fatherless families are 4 times more likely to raise children in poverty. And research suggests that 84% of homeless families are headed by women. While divorce causes some single-parent households, approximately 40% of children, guys, listen to this stat, are born to unwed mothers. And I say this is one of the most crazy stat things for me as a pastor. I would say 80+% of every couple that I have ever married, most of them are already living together. These are in the church now, living together, having premarital sex. That's the majority of them are already engaged in this. And these are people that are in the church, so to speak. What we're looking at here is we're seeing here, this is mind-blowing though, and this is the whole thing about marriage. A lot of people aren't even getting married anymore. In fact, many people are just shacking it up and trying it out and seeing how it works. Well, here's the truth. It does not work. It doesn't work. God's plan works. But we have that, this stat to me is absolutely mind-boggling, that approximately 40% of children are born to unwed mothers in single-parent households. For women under the age of 30, the demographic that bears 2/3 of children in general, the out-of-wedlock rate increases to 53%, guys. That is mind-blowing. That is poor leaders. That is men that need to keep, I'm not going to get there. While many unmarried women cohabitate with a partner at the time of giving birth, these relationships fail as twice the rate of marriages. So you can think about that. Marriage rates are about 50-50. So if you take it twice, you're looking at an incredibly high percentage. And people wonder why these relationships don't work. Well, because they're not, God is the one who designed marriage. He wrote the book to protect you and give you these outlying boundaries to protect you from the pain of all of this garbage here. Merely being physically present at home is not enough as a father. Listen to this. According to the founder of Mind Positive Parenting, David Walsh, data suggests that even for children with a father present in the home, the average school-age boy, you wonder why we've got all this freaky crap going down? We got a problem here. These are talking about the average school-age boy who has a father in the home only spends 30 minutes out of a week in one-on-one conversation with his father. 30 minutes out of a week, your son or the sons of these men actually spend in conversation with their father. That's mind-blowing. For comparison, the same boy on average will spend more than 40 hours per week watching television, playing video games, and surfing the internet. 30 minutes one-on-one time with dad. 40 plus hours a week watching TV, playing video games, or surfing the internet. Where do you think the influence in the life of that young boy is going to come from? I can tell you that 30 minutes with dad is going to be washed over by the 40 plus hours of the smut, crap, and garbage that's coming into that boy's life the rest of his week. You multiply that times 52 weeks, and then you multiply that by about 15 to 17 years, you're getting an incredible percentage difference here. I need to sit down and do the math on this and just point that out. So you can be a dad who's living with his wife, raising his family in the home, and you can be an absentee father, having no leadership whatsoever, having no leadership whatsoever going on in the home. It's pretty amazing. These are real numbers. These are real stats, which is pretty interesting. Another study from the National Bureau of Economic Research found that on the average, fathers spend 1.83 hours per week engaging in recreational child care. Like, hey, let's go fishing. Let's go to the park. Let's go catch and play ball. Let's go play Frisbee. Let's go ride horses. Let's go whatever it is. 1.83 hours per week engaging in recreational child care, and less than 7 hours a week on all child care activities. Data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics show that fathers spend, on the average, only 1 hour a day in total caring for and helping household children, which includes 0.05 hours a day reading to or with them. Fatherlessness and mental health. The effects of broken families have been staggering. Children from fatherless homes are far worse in overall well-being and mental and behavioral health. We know this is a fact. These children are often burdened with low self-esteem. They do not understand why their fathers abandoned them. This leads to a number of emotional problems like anxiety, social withdrawal, and depression, and leads to an increased risk of suicide and other forms of self-harm. Data suggests that 63% of youth suicides are from fatherless homes, and 85% of children who exhibit behavioral disorders are from fatherless homes, and that comes from the Department of Justice office. Overall data suggests that children from single-parent families are twice as likely to suffer from mental health and behavioral problems as those living with married parents. Pretty crazy. Research also suggests that high-risk children in single-parent homes have nearly 5 times greater chance of developing mood disorders than those of dual-parent households, even when controlling for household income, age, and depression stats of parents. Considering these stats, it's no surprise that children in single-parent families also have higher prevalence in suicidal attempts, and also it's a significant contributor to mental health issues in children. Data also says that children without fathers are 10 times more likely to abuse chemical substances. 71% of all children who abuse substances come from fatherless homes. Just take that into consideration when you see this. And that comes from the National Center for Fathering. Another study found that 75% of adolescent patients in substance abuse centers are from fatherless homes. You don't think the father has a major contribution and also a responsibility for leadership in the home? And what happens when leadership is absent? You're seeing it. Destruction. That's what happens. Unbelievable. Let's see here. Unsurprisingly, those without a father in the home fare far worse in educational achievement than their two-parent counterparts. There's data that show that if fathers are not engaged, children are twice as likely to drop out of school than children with both parents at home. That's from the National Responsible Fatherhood Clearinghouse. President Barack Obama, which I don't even want to mention, I don't even know what he's in here for, stated that the number could even be much higher, declaring that children who grew up without a father are 9 times more likely to drop out of school. There's data that shows 71% of high school dropouts are from fatherless homes. I mean, I can just go on and on and on and on and on and on, but I'm not going to do that for sake of boring you to absolute death. So what you find here, guys, the father is essential. And what does that mean? That means the father, whose key role is very, very important as the leader over his wife and family, is very crucial. So let's go through this real quickly. Hopefully we can jump through this fast enough that we can get through here before I lose every one of you on the podcast. So here we go. Leadership is first and foremost defined as stewardship. That's the very first aspect that we understand in Scripture is it is stewardship, right? Stewardship is the careful and responsible management of something entrusted to one's care. So there is a pervasive way of thinking for men that, they have a worldly mindset when it comes to their wife and their children, right? When you understand the reality that what you have been given is something that God requires stewardship from you. In other words, your wife has been given to you from God. She's a gift from God, and we are a steward of our wives in relationship to how we love and lead and cherish and honor and spiritually lead, how we do that. We are a steward of what God has given us in our wives. So you think differently about your wife when you understand that she belongs to God, and she ultimately is a Christian, that she is a child of God, and as a husband before God to love her like Christ loves the church in Ephesians 5:22 through 33, we learn these incredible truths. We are a steward of this. And then your children, they are a gift from the Lord. And they're not yours, they're His. And we are a steward of the lives that God has given us, and we only have them for such a short period of time. And that stewardship is very critical, and stewardship is leadership. It's what it is. So a steward is a manager of someone else's property. So management is leadership. That's why you understand that when you have a degree in management, you're in a leadership position, right? You don't have to be a CEO of a company to be a leader, by the way. 1 Timothy 4:12 says, "Let no one despise you for your youth, but set the believers an example in speech and conduct, in love, in faith, and purity." So sometimes guys will make the excuse, "Well, I'm young, or I don't have this, or I don't have that, so I can't lead." No, the truth is we all can lead, and we all are leading. Just whether we're leading well or leading poorly is the question. So every single young man that's listening to this podcast should be learning as much as they can learn about how to become a great leader according to Scripture. You can learn a lot about leadership. You learn from Scripture, you learn from Christ, you learn from Christian godly men, and you can learn. We had a really interesting question come up in one of our refuels, and one of the questions was a young man, young father, young husband, just the desire to know, how to do this. How do I do this thing, man? Because, a lot of times we don't have an example in our own earthly father. And even if you did, it's different than watching it. So it's great to have men in your life that can encourage you and can share wisdom and can teach you certain aspects of what they've learned in relationship to their leadership of being a husband and a father. The most significant leadership that you will ever involve yourself in is not a Fortune 500 corporation, or it's not the factory at the place you work, or it's not the business that you have, or whatever it is. There's so many men that are great leaders in the workplace, but they have failed epically in the leadership of their marriage and in their homes as a father. Do you see how whacked and jacked that is? The most significant, because the world tells you, hey, this is what your life's about. Go make a bunch of money, be successful, climb the ladder. You can have it all, man. And they've traded the trinkets and the trash of the world, if you will, for the treasure of a marriage and of their family, their children, their sons, their daughters, and the relationships they can have. Listen, you're an absolute fool if you have traded all of the greatest treasures in your children, grandchildren, and in your wife, for if you've done that and you've just went after the things of the world, you have got nothing but a pile of what? Wood, hay, and stubble. That's all you have. Wood, hay, and stubble. And you have traded it for the gold, silver, and precious stones. And I would hate to be a man that comes to the end of his life and he comes to the understanding that he traded trash for treasures. Be a terrible way to end, wouldn't it? There's lots of men who are going to end that way. Stewardship is the understanding that everything you have and everything you ever will have Everything under your leadership belongs, number one, to God. It all belongs to God. The earth is the Lord's, the fullness thereof, the world and those who dwell therein. Psalm 24:1. God owns it all. It all belongs to Him. Your wife belongs to God. Your finances belong to God. Your time belongs to God. Your talent belongs to God. Your company belongs to God. Your children belong to God. And we're stewards of what God has given us, right? So you and I are to carefully and responsibly care for what God has entrusted to us. Leadership is stewardship, is responsibility, is accountability. Leadership is stewardship. Stewardship is responsibility. Responsibility understands that there's accountability. So you can put that down. Leadership, stewardship, responsibility, accountability. And this is something that you can live by, right? You can live by this. Leadership must have this mindset as its foundation. What? It all belongs to God, and I'm a steward. And since I'm a steward in leadership of what God has given me, I have the responsibility of doing it well. Why? Because there's a day coming when I will give an account for the way in which I led and stewarded the things that God gave me. Leadership that glorifies God requires a shift in the way that we think. So proper leadership begins with the mind, with a proper understanding of stewardship, of God's ownership, and our leadership. So, you are therefore a steward of what God has entrusted to your care for bringing out potential gain for the glory of God. So, it's interesting, marriage ceremony, most people don't know what's really going on here. It's probably one of the most powerful things that happens in the ceremony, and most people miss it. They all like to watch the father walk the daughter, and I've walked my daughter down the aisle. And then I'm standing there, and a friend of mine, because I'm doing the actual ceremony, but a friend of mine would ask this question. He shares a little bit about, marriage, covenant, so on and so forth, and then he'll ask the question, who gives this woman to be married to this man? And the response is this, normally, her mother and I. And the father takes the hand of the daughter. See, fathers, the stewardship that you have in properly loving your daughters is incredible. You are the one who provides for her, who loves her, who makes sure she knows her value. She's not going to need to go to some hairy-legged 16-year-old boy that says, I love you, you're beautiful, and get all googly-woogly and lose her virginity with a 16-year-old bum, piece of trash male. No, she don't have to do that. Why? Because you're going to validate her as the father, man, leader in her life from the time she's born until the time you hand her off. You're going to validate her as being the most incredible, unbelievable, beautiful woman that she is. And it starts when they're young and all the way through. She won't need to go find validation from some goofy piece of trash boy out there who doesn't want to give her anything but sex. That's all he wants, is a piece of her action. He couldn't care less about her. He doesn't love her. He doesn't desire any of that. He wants one thing, and he's a piece of trash. And what happens is when fathers fail in their leadership of stewarding and what? Validating, loving, protecting, providing, all that we do as fathers for the daughters go out looking for validation, and they start looking for it when they're pretty young. That's why you see these 12-year-old girls, and they're out there, and they're looking like a bunch of hoochies in some strip in Las Vegas. What are they looking for? They're looking for validation from some boy, because the father neglected to validate, godly validation given to the daughter. She knows she's valuable. She don't have to go around dressing like a freaking hooch so some guy will look at her, because her value is far greater than that. She's going to have certain aspects of confidence, and she's going to be loved by her father and cherished by her father. And she's going to have an understanding of her identity is in Christ, and her identity is not in her height or her body size or how big her breasts are. No, her validation has been given to her by the Father, her Father, ultimately the Heavenly Father. And therefore, she's going to what? She's going to have the right understanding of the value of who she is. And I want to speak on that because many fathers fail in their leadership with their daughters, and you're the most important relationship in her life. The absolute most important relationship is between you and your daughter, sir, as far as in her life growing up. And the mother, yes, they have a very unique relationship. My wife and my daughter, they're great friends. But there was a role that I played that my wife could not play. My wife didn't validate. I don't care how much a mom validates her daughter. She needs the validation from the father because she's made this way, right? And so I'm just simply saying this, guys, don't neglect your daughter and validate her in a godly manner. Teach her from a young age what it means, what true beauty is, what true value is. Teach her from a godly age what God says about who she is and what she is, and how someday God will have for her a young man who will love her and cherish her. And so what happens in this ceremony is after 20-some years of doing this in the life of my daughter, I take her hand and I place her hand, or the father takes her hand and he moves it and hands it to the soon-to-be son-in-law. And there's a transfer that happens. In other words, I was the one that validated her, loved her, provided for her, protected her. All those things that we did, I'm transferring that to you now. You are responsible for this woman. You're accountable to me, young man, for the way you love her, for the way you take care of her. I'm her father. And so there's a transfer that happens. And so with that, there's leadership on his part. But with that leadership, we understand that there is stewardship of what he's just been given. And understanding that with the stewardship, the significance of the stewardship aspect, there is responsibility that he now has to own up to. And then there's that accountability as well. So it's the same thing in that relationship. Don't know why I got off on that. Some of you guys are probably already were like rolling your eyes on that, but it's a true statement. It's a true statement. If you don't want your girl looking for validation from some punk Joe at some stinking, hairy-legged boy, if you don't want her doing that, you better get serious about how you cherish and raise her and validate her, loving her like Jesus Christ, showing her how wonderful and beautiful and teaching her. And you got to do that, man. If you don't, her tank will be empty, and she'll go around looking for that. She'll go around looking for that. And so here we go, moving on. So leadership, here's James 1:17 says this: every good gift and every perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father. Okay? God is the one that blesses us and gives us these gifts. There's an umbrella to Christian leadership. It's found in 1 Corinthians 11:3. I want you to understand this, Paul says, that the head of every man is Christ, the head of a wife is her husband, and the head of Christ is God. Here's the umbrella. God the Father, head of Christ, the eternal Son of God, who is head of the husband, who is head of the wife. And below the wife comes what? The children. So there is an order that God has established in headship, leadership, servanthood, loving, and all those things. And those things need to be in alignment. So if you want to be a good leader, you're going to have to be under the headship of Christ, because good leadership begins with understanding how we follow. Good leaders follow. And a good leader, a Christian man, will be following Christ, because you can't lead well if you're not following Christ. I can guarantee you that. Proverbs 11:14, we're almost done. Where there is no guidance, a people fail. But in the abundance of counselors, there is safety. Leadership, guys, is absolutely essential. And there's a whole lot more we could talk about on leadership. And so what I want you to see and understand is that most importantly for you to think about today is leadership is stewardship, stewardship is responsibility, and responsibility will one day result in accountability. So think about it this way as you do your best by God's grace to lead your wife and your children. It's the most important ministry you will ever give yourself to. It is the most important area of leadership that you will ever give yourself to, and the outcome of that will have the most impact in your life of anything in the world. Why? Because your marriage, number one, is the most significant earthly relationship. And then number two, it is the relationship that you have with the precious kids that God's given you. Those are the treasures, some of the treasures that God has given you. Don't trade them for the trashy trinkets of this world. God bless you guys. Stay gritty, and we'll see you next time on the Gritty Men Podcast.